Today's guest is a voice of clarity and conviction in the movement toward a more sustainable and conscious future. Based in Australia, this respected speaker, author, and podcast host is shining a spotlight on the importance of regenerative agriculture and the critical role that it plays in planetary and human health. Beyond agriculture, his impact extends to the realms of the workplace, well being, and safety, where he's known internationally for helping organizations create healthier, more human centered environments for their people. A true connector of ideas, people, and purpose, he brings fresh insight and grounded optimism to the conversation. It is my great honor to welcome John Toomey. Welcome, John.
Colette, how you going?
It's going great over here. We're in the middle of a heat wave, which we're usually in June gloom. So that's fun in
Yes,
Los Angeles. And you're down under,
yes,
for those of you that don't know.
yes. My beautiful wife is heading to Los Angeles next Friday, and she said she loves May and nobody likes June, apparently.
It's interesting. It's the June gloom rolls. It used to be June, but it starts May, June, July, and it wraps up in August.
Right,
It's
gotcha.
interesting. It's really interesting, which leads us into what we're going to talk about today in the world of regenerative farming. And for those of you who don't know what this is, it's very simple, but yet we have made it so complicated. So, why don't you give us, for those that don't know what regenerative farming is, give us a little snapshot.
Okay, so wisdom builds up over years, right? They say the difference between Chinese medicine and Western medicine is there's 5,000 years of wisdom in Chinese medicine, whereas Western medicine is like 100 years old. And the same thing with agriculture. Over many, many years, people worked out what worked. They didn't have brutal plows to rip up the land, so they had to plant and they dug up the ground just to loosen enough so they could plant. And then they also learned over time that if you had one particular crop that had natural pests, there were other crops that you could plant with it that repelled those pests. So they call that companion planting now. And so basically, what that allowed farmers to do was to produce really good crops without having them raided by insects. And that wisdom was just generated over millennia. And the same thing with the soil. A lot of farmers could, by just picking the soil up and running it through their fingers, they could tell whether it was ready for planting or not, or whether it needed more time to regenerate. Because what happens when you've got, for example, you might grow corn, once you take the ears of the corn and you just leave the rest of the plant to rot, it rots into the soil. That creates food for the parasites and bacteria in the soils. And the soil regenerates itself and it builds new life back into the soil, and the worms thrive. And then it gets to the point where it's ready to go again. Now, that's a slower, more methodical method of farming. And then what happened with modern farming is that the chemical companies realized, oh, and this all happened accidentally, by the way, because after the First World War, there was a lot of, from weapons manufacturing, there was these massive stockpiles of NPK, sodium, potassium, nitrogen, and phosphorus. And all these big piles of this stuff were there. And they noticed the grass was really thriving. And they thought, wow, why is that grass growing so fast around that stuff? And they realized that just by putting those three minerals in the soil, you could get plants to grow really quickly. Now,
Hmm.
of course, those plants grew with fluid retention. Right? So you got big vegetables and fruits that may not have been as flavoursome or as tasty. So basically, what happened when chemicals came into farming, they realized they could use chemical fertilizer. And using those modern chemical techniques, you could basically get crops to grow in soil that wasn't much more than dust.
Yeah.
And in, I think it was 1936, a politician stood up in the Congress in the US and said, we have a major problem in our country. Our soils are depleted. This was 1936, and our
Wow.
use of chemicals is destroying our soil. But of course, that didn't change anything because the salesman just kept going to the farmers saying, hey, we'll give you big crop yields. And everybody was seduced by that. And why wouldn't they be? And
Right.
in the end, you end up with soil that's dying, food that's not very nutritious, massive amounts of chemicals in the soil. Like, for example, since GMO crops have come into play, the main herbicide pesticide that is used to protect those crops from any other plants is called glyphosate.
Mm.
And glyphosate, they're still pouring hundreds of millions of tons of it into the soil every year. It's a water-soluble chemical. It's now been identified as a massive factor in so many chronic diseases, cancers included, and dementia in women and Parkinson's disease in men. And because it's water-soluble, we can't remove it from the water table. The only thing that picks it up and clears it out is mushroom mycelium.
Wow.
Yeah, and so the bottom of the Mississippi Delta is the biggest cancer hotspot in the world because of all the glyphosate that's accumulated there. And of course, for those of you who've never heard of glyphosate, we're talking about Roundup.
Yeah.
And so that sort of thing is out of control, whereas a huge number of people now saying that's not the way to do it anymore. Let's go back to regenerative agriculture, where we stop using chemicals, we nurture the soil, get the soil really healthy so that it produces really healthy food, use companion planting so that we don't have the pests destroying our crops. And on top of that, the piece that a lot of people, even people who've heard of regenerative agriculture, the piece that people haven't heard about is no-till regenerative agriculture,
Mhm.
which basically means you plant the seed straight into the ground. You don't plow the ground, because when we plow the ground, we release carbon, huge amounts of it,
Yes. And
huge
and
amounts.
I would love to go into that, but I want to mention first back to the glyphosate that it's also known as Agent Orange, and it was used in the Vietnam War to clear massive amounts of jungle. And they said, "Oh, we've got something here." And they brought it back to the States and they used it liberally. And it's increased, and other places definitely have either slowed it down or they have completely removed it. But I think just being mindful, yes, of that, of pesticides. And when you drive through the Midwest of the states, it is just brown field after brown field of just dead dirt that is just laying there. And it's pretty sad. So when you understand the concept that we're about to talk about, regenerative farming, where you're planting over the top of untouched earth that has a cover, it has grass, it has weeds, it has different things in it. It's a habitat. And I want you to go into as well, because you just did a piece on this about all the power plants that were throwing up windmills, and people are saying other things are causing the carbon, but actually it's the tilling of the soil. So go ahead where you left off and tell us about the soil and how it impacts.
There's a really interesting part to this. See, we go out in the sun to get warm, yeah?
Mhm.
And when it's not warm, we need to find heat from somewhere. And the really interesting thing is that the sun shines on plants, trees, all those sorts of things. And they absorb the sunlight through the process of photosynthesis, then bring in carbon dioxide, which is plant food. And part of the byproduct of all that whole metabolism of the plant is oxygen. It's a really lovely exchange. And the carbon stays in the plant. And the plant grows and grows, and every plant is a storehouse of carbon. And carbon is also stored down in the soil through the plant's roots and through the microbiota in the soil. Now, when the plant dies, it gets returned into the soil and all that carbon gets returned into the soil. If the plant that dies is a tree and you're cold, you can go and cut that tree up and set it alight and release the heat of the sun that has been stored in that tree. Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
And so that carbon gets returned back to the atmosphere. So we're
Mm.
not increasing carbon anywhere. It's just cycling through the process. And the same thing over millennia, some of that plant foliage gets crushed down into the ground and ends up being coal or oil or gas. But it's still all just stored carbon that started out as carbon that was drawn out of the atmosphere under the warmth of the sun into the plant, and eventually it gets released.
Mm.
Yeah.
Wow.
So what we're talking about here is all the ways that carbon gets released from the earth back into the atmosphere. Now, I did some numbers. The Earth's atmosphere contains about 850 gigatons of carbon. The Earth's soils contain about 3,000 gigatons of carbon. The flora and fauna, which is plants, people, and animals, contain about 600 gigatons. And the stored fossil fuels under the ground, the coal, the oil, the gas, store about 8,000 gigatons, so nearly 10 times what's in the atmosphere. But we're talking here about the various ways that carbon gets released back into the atmosphere. Now, as I said before, 850 gigatons in the atmosphere, 3,000 gigatons in the earth, in the soil. When we plow the soil, we release the carbon. Now, you can understand somebody plowing the soil when they've got to try and plant seed by hand when the ground's hard. But we don't need that anymore because we've developed machinery that allows us to just drive the seed straight into the ground without disturbing anything. Yeah.
That's amazing. That's
Yeah.
amazing.
So we plant that plant, no carbon leaves us because of the plowing, and that plant immediately starts drawing carbon out of the atmosphere.
That's
It's pretty
beautiful.
cool. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And when it's tilled, it releases, what's the statistic when the soil is tilled? How much does it release into the atmosphere?
Look, it's extraordinary. I know here in Australia that fossil fuels, if we try to go net zero by eliminating our fossil fuels, we can prevent ourselves from releasing 115, I think it's million tons of carbon into the atmosphere. If we stop tilling the soil, it's 105 million
Wow.
tons. So it's almost the same.
Wow.
Almost the same. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So there's that. And then there's also our bodies. And when we're eating those vegetables from depleted soil or fruits, plants, we're not getting the benefit. They look pretty, they taste good. They've genetically modified it to be that way. But when we're eating regenerative, it actually feeds our body and it heals us. It's very regenerative. And it's a way that I really wish that we could, and I know it's a growing movement, but this podcast, for example, I want everyone to know about regenerative farmed products because it's part of the wellness journey. It's part of the healing of our lands, of our bodies, and more people need to know. So if you have your own little garden, kudos to you that you're doing part of this regenerative farming that we're talking about today.
Yeah. It's a really cool point because I reckon everybody at some point in their lifetime should have a veggie garden and learn how to do it and grow vegetables without using chemicals
Hmm.
and just see actually how easy it is to do. And then
Yeah.
you realize that on a bigger scale, it can be done on farms. There's organic farms that have been using no-till regenerative agriculture for years, and their produce is stunning. And there's no reason why other farms can't. And I did a whole costing on it. What would it cost to change it all over? And it was just, I mean, I had no clue where it was going. I just dived in and did the research. And it was just stunning how inexpensive it would be for a country like Australia, and I'm sure the US, over a 5 to 10 year period, convert every single farm to no-till regenerative agriculture. The farmers would make a lot more money. The health of the nation would improve out of
Hmm.
sight.
Yeah.
Our use of chemicals would reduce drastically, and these are chemicals that just continue to pollute the soil. Farmers would achieve much greater satisfaction, and we would be generating so much richness and health in our soil that the carbon sequestration back into the soil would also improve. So there's actually not a downside anywhere. There's
No.
no downside. Oh, I'm sorry. The downside is that the chemical companies, some of them might go broke, but who cares? Nobody cared that typewriter companies went broke when computers came in.
Oh,
It's
yeah.
just what happens. So,
Blockbuster went under when everything went online. Like
yeah,
every industry, it changes, it iterates. And to your point of we would be healthier, we have a sick care system and our foods that we're eating are making us sick. And there's the other industry of the healthcare industry. If we start eating well and being mindful and exercising and meditating and doing all these things, their revenue is going to reduce significantly. I would just throw a number and just say, I bet it would reduce it down to maybe at least half of their profits right now. And what would that do to them? They wouldn't be profitable, but we would have all these citizens that were very productive members of society and doing things that they love to do. And so I think when that would go away, there would be a whole nother avenue where people could make money, do things they love because they actually feel well.
So interesting. For years and years, I've been preaching on about organic produce and natural farming techniques for nearly 40 years. And always I get pushback. And the pushback I get is always from people predominantly who are in medicine who make a really good living off disease. And they say stuff like, oh, there's no reliable evidence of that. There is a lot of evidence, and there's so many papers being published on it. But because they're not in this flow of the mainstream journals and those sorts of things, you've got to go looking to find them. But those professions are going to protect their income. They're going to do whatever they can to protect their income, and that's okay. But the information is just going to become overwhelming. And you're dead right. I can see in my lifetime, and I'm 65, I can see in my lifetime at least one of the big pharmaceutical companies collapsing because the old model that they've built themselves on won't work anymore, and they won't be able to pivot fast enough to save themselves. And I think that in my lifetime, we'll also see a reduction in the number of hospitals, because we will get to that point where we've got this young generation who are so informed. They're online all the time. They're reading this stuff.
Yeah.
And they're asking questions. And I think it's your daughters are living in a very exciting time. There's a real potential for young people to step up and make change. And I think that's so exciting.
Yeah. And I also, when coaching people, I say, you're doing this for yourself, but you're actually doing it for your family because your children are watching you. And sure enough, they come back out to me and say, oh, my kids noticed I was eating different and they wanted to eat like me and they're curious about why. And so it's these conversations that we have and make a delicious whole meal, put it on the table for your family because we need conversation. We need whole foods. We need this kind of back to the natural state of being to really heal ourselves.
Reveals something else that's really important, Colette, which really does relate to wellness in a huge way. Is I've been posting a fair bit about the environment recently. I've been writing a lot and posting stuff and posting other people's material. And I get a lot of blowback from good friends. In fact, a really good friend of mine blocked me on social media this morning. I was sad, but I had a little bit of a laugh because she's obviously very challenged by what I'm saying. But the only thing that they tend to come back with is, what about the science? It's an undisputed fact among scientists that we're going through climate change and it's really bad, right? And what they've just told me is that they haven't read a single thing. They've just listened to a news broadcast and they've decided to buy into it. Now, human beings have been doing that forever. There's a desire within us to want to be right, and I've got to be careful of that in myself as well. And so we buy into something that's socially acceptable, and we don't actually do the homework to find out whether it's really right or not. And the challenge for us there is that if we do the homework and we realize it's not right, then we're faced with having the courage to stand up and speak up. And a lot of folks haven't got that courage. That doesn't mean they're bad people. But this level of indoctrination, I'm just seeing it all across now, is how intense the indoctrination is in our society. And for us to create change, we have to make it inspiring enough that people are prepared to just question their indoctrination a little bit, because they only have to question it a little bit and they'll start seeing things and it'll start to unfold. But right now, this indoctrination that there's some sort of environmental Armageddon coming over the horizon, it's really strong. But the people who are buying into it the most are the people over 45. They've lost their playfulness. They've lost their curiosity. Whereas the young ones, I've got a lot of faith in them because a lot of it doesn't make sense to them. Here's hoping. Yeah.
With levels of everything, cancer, autoimmune disease on the rise, there is a correlation. And I would just challenge everyone to take what we're saying and go research it yourself and do the due diligence because we're conduits. We're telling you things that we're hearing and learning and observing. And you need to fact check for yourself too and see for yourself. Because if you're of the mindset that your children should be eating chicken nuggets and French fries and a Coke, then, we're in for a really bad future. And we really need to look at that regenerative farm. And while we're speaking of it, there's a movie that came out. It's called The Biggest Little Farm. I don't know if you've seen it.
So
Yeah,
beautiful. You should watch it. It really does. It puts it in a nutshell, basically.
it does. And it's basically just for those of you to go and watch it later. It's a farm that has never been able to be fruitful and it was bankrupt. And this family comes in and they change it. But the process in which they change it, it will blow your mind. It will make you a believer in what we're talking about today. It's an absolutely beautiful documentary about regenerative farming.
Very true. And something to pick up on what you said before is that disease is not the natural state of the human body.
Mm-mm.
If you want to develop your musculature, you go to the gym, you do the right program, you train, and you create muscle. Yeah.
Correct.
If you want to play sport and you want to be quicker, then you do the right training and you create speed. You create the capacity of the muscles to contract more rapidly and the limbs to move more quickly, and you create speed. And in the same vein, we also create disease. It doesn't happen to us. There's a tiny microscopic percentage of the population in the world that might have some really weird disease that's got
Mhm.
some genetic influence.
Yeah.
But that's not you, person who's listening to this podcast. If you're going to get disease, you have to create it. And the best way to create it is by not eating well and
Mhm.
allowing your body to be infested with chemicals that don't belong there and eating food that's not nutritious. And life has spiritual challenges, Colette, and you know this, right? You can't be fit and healthy without pushing through your laziness and overcoming that and going through some physical suffering to get a result. Yeah. But the same thing happens with food. When I go to a restaurant, one of the things I see on the menu is fries. I love fries, but do I order them? No. Very occasionally, my wife and I will say, let's have some fries tonight. But they won't be McDonald's fries either. And we also won't buy the fries if the restaurant doesn't make them fresh on the premises. We're not
Mhm.
interested in frozen fries. Well, we've learned how to say no to those things. And one of the things I said no to a long time ago is sugar. I
Mm.
just do not allow sugar into my diet. Now, that took a bit of work because I love sweet things, but this is the discipline because if we want good health, we've got to create it. If we want disease, we've got to create that as well.
Yeah.
And Edward Stanley, the 15th Earl of Derby, once said, those who have no time for bodily exercise must sooner or later find time for illness. And,
Yeah. That's a good one.
and Thomas Moffat in the year 1600 said, more men die by their own teeth more than the weapons of any enemy.
Wow. 1600.
1600. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
King Solomon saying there's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
And
Well,
that's,
and there was a plaque taken off a wall in an archaeological dig in Egypt back in the 90s. They'd excavated all this sand and uncovered this area. It was like a community meeting place, like a
Mhm.
community square. And there's all these things on the wall, hieroglyphic, but signs. And one of them, when they translated it, basically said, people live off 1/3 of what they eat. Of the other 2/3 lives their physician.
Oh, that's good too.
Yeah, yeah,
Wow. So this
yeah,
is just repetitive. We're in this cycle of sickness and not knowing, or I would say today's informational world, you absolutely know what's going
yeah.
on and why, and it can be prevented. So, somebody that's trying to kick the sugar or do something where they're trying to improve their health, what would you recommend to them? Are there like three things that you would do to help them to curb their cravings, or would you recommend them just to start eating more natural foods? What would it be?
One is to make sure that you're really well hydrated. Hydration is such a massively key factor in health, and your water needs to be filtered. And you should be drinking about a pint of water for every 20 or 25 pounds of body weight per day. Okay.
Okay.
Now, for a start, that might mean that you're running to the toilet and you're urinating a lot, but that's okay because your body's just relearning how to handle its hydration. That's number one. Number two, this might seem strange, but get to learn to enjoy the feeling of being a little bit hungry.
Mm,
Yeah. Because we're so wealthy and we've got food all around us, every time we get a little bit peckish, we go and eat something. Whereas what would happen if you said to yourself, I'm actually just going to endure feeling hungry for the next 4 hours and delay it a little bit. And then that brings in a very old skill, a spiritual development skill called delaying gratification. So putting it off. Yeah. And the next thing is to make sure you've got enough good, nutritious, delicious food that you can eat instead of going for stuff that's really sweet or fast food or those sorts of things. And one of the things I always do, if I cook a meal at night, I cooked a beautiful pumpkin and tofu curry the other night, Colette, and I always make enough for 3 meals.
smart. Yeah.
So we have the meal, put the rest in containers, put some in the fridge to be eaten tomorrow, and some in the freezer to be eaten when we come home and we've got no food to eat.
Yep.
So I've always got that supply there. So there's always good, nutritious food available to feed when hungry. And the other thing is, and I'm going to give you a fourth tip, is go to bed early at night because a lot of people eat when they're sitting up watching television. I promise you, you're not going to die if you miss that episode of what it is you're watching. Go to bed,
Right.
let yourself sleep more, you
Grab
know?
book, right?
Grab a book.
Yeah.
No TVs in the bedroom. It's
No.
bad. It's
Do
bad.
you say
Yeah.
TVs or tellies over there?
Tellies, yeah. Yeah.
You've adapted to the American because of your wife, right?
I've always called it the idiot box, but we've called it telly because I think telly came from England actually.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
So but yeah, I think they're really cool things to do. And then start educating yourself. And if you can, build a veggie garden in your backyard and start playing around with some regenerative agriculture and see what happens. So what you learn and become more aware. And I'm sure, Colette, you'll share that article I wrote where I actually compare the costs of renewable energy versus regenerative agriculture. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
like governments keep telling us, oh, we're sorry about the higher power bills. They're going to come down eventually. They're never coming down because the renewable path is so expensive and it's never going to be inexpensive. We need to rattle some cages.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Tell people how they can find you.
Ah, I'm right here. So I'm easy to find on LinkedIn, is John Toomey, and Facebook, although I've got 10 friends on Facebook who have the same name as me. Can you believe that? Yeah, John.Toomey on Instagram. And my website is wideawakewellness.com.au.
Okay. And we will put that in the show notes. My question that I love to ask at the end is if this was the last message that you had to broadcast out to the world, what would it be?
So, whatever it is that you do today, do it from a place of decency.
That's beautiful. That's beautiful to reflect upon because that's where it's at. And if we can think from that perspective and be mindful, then we'll pay it forward and the world would just be a better place. Such wise advice. Thank you. I appreciate
Always,
your time
always,
coming from
always good to talk to you.
it is all the way from Australia. I appreciate it. And I can't wait to have you back on. And please, if you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with a friend. Check out John Toomey. He is just a wealth of information. John, thank you so much. And
Thanks,
everyone else,
Colette.
until next time, be
Lots
well.
of love.